By the third week of grand jury proceedings, it had become clear that this was no longer a political inconvenience that could be managed with carefully worded press statements. Washington has a way of quietly absorbing scandal, muting it, waiting for the public to lose interest. But this time, the pattern was too clean, the digital trail too precise, and the stakes too public to contain. Congressman Daniel Whitmore was no longer being discussed as a victim of partisan backlash. He was being analyzed as a subject in a potential federal conspiracy case. Inside the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., prosecutors methodically reconstructed the timeline for the grand jury. They did not frame it as an emotional confrontation between a politician and a veteran. They framed it as a structured sequence of actions supported by digital evidence. They began with 2017. Thomas Avery's town hall confrontation was re-examined through recovered internal communications. Emails showed campaign aides identifying Avery days before the event as a high-emotion participant. A strategy memo discussed the value of visible leadership moments when challenged publicly. The language was sanitized, but the intent was unmistakable. Confrontation could be useful if managed correctly. Prosecutors then pivoted to 2019 and the Liberty Foundation Gala. They presented the metadata showing that the draft of Michael Rivera's police complaint began hours before the gala ended. They displayed internal Slack messages referencing the Rivera angle. They played the hallway footage capturing Whitmore laughing and saying, "That'll play well," 30 minutes after allegedly fearing for his safety. The grand jury did not see outrage. They saw sequence. Preparation. Activation. And then came the testimony of Evan Cole. Cole appeared composed but visibly burdened. As a former communications aide, he had once admired Whitmore's political instincts. Under oath, however, admiration gave way to candor. Cole described weekly strategy sessions where polling data was dissected and messaging scenarios were rehearsed. According to his testimony, Whitmore often emphasized the importance of appearing firm in the face of confrontation. Conflict clarifies leadership, Cole recalled him saying during a 2017 planning meeting. When prosecutors asked whether the Rivera complaint aligned with prior strategic discussions about managing critics, Cole answered without hesitation that it did. He explained that drafting contingency complaint language was considered prudent optics preparation. The phrase chilled the room. Optics preparation. In that phrase, prosecutors argued, lay the dividing line between genuine fear and manufactured narrative. Within days of that testimony, the grand jury returned a multi-count indictment. The charges were severe: conspiracy to obstruct justice, filing false statements, abuse of official authority, wire fraud related to campaign fund allocation, and witness intimidation tied to alleged post-complaint communications. The indictment was unsealed on a Tuesday morning. By noon, Whitmore had surrendered voluntarily. There were no dramatic scenes, no raised voices. He arrived in a dark tailored suit, flanked by attorneys, and walked into the courthouse with a fixed, unreadable expression. The cameras that once captured his confident speeches now recorded a quieter image, a man stepping into uncertainty. For Michael Rivera, watching the coverage from his living room felt surreal. Vindication is rarely cinematic. It is often heavy and complicated. Although the intimidation charge against him had been dismissed, the damage to his reputation lingered. His daughter had endured whispers at school. His wife had faced invasive questions from acquaintances. Rivera did not feel triumphant. He felt relieved that the truth had surfaced, but he also felt acutely aware that not everyone targeted by such machinery had been as fortunate. Whitmore's legal defense mobilized quickly. His lead attorney, Charles Henley, was a former federal prosecutor known for dismantling complex white-collar cases. Henley's strategy was twofold. First, he reframed the indictment as politically motivated overreach. Second, he attacked the interpretation of intent. Henley argued that drafting complaint templates was responsible contingency planning for a public official regularly facing hostile crowds. He emphasized that fear is subjective and that no statute criminalizes a person's internal perception of threat. He questioned the credibility of Evan Cole, highlighting the immunity agreement that protected him from prosecution. The defense's most compelling argument centered on ambiguity. Henley contended that the existence of draft language did not prove activation in bad faith. It could, he suggested, simply reflect preparedness in a volatile political climate. For a brief moment, legal analysts speculated that the case might narrow to technicalities. Then federal prosecutors introduced a new piece of evidence. Recovered from an encrypted drive seized during the raid was a voice memo recorded on the night of the gala. The timestamp placed it at 10:02 p.m., approximately 30 minutes after the confrontation with Rivera. The audio, though slightly distorted, captured Whitmore speaking privately with his chief of staff in what investigators believed was a parking garage adjacent to the venue. In the recording, Whitmore stated, "Make sure the report emphasizes instability." That's the angle. That single sentence shifted the legal terrain dramatically. Fear may be subjective. Narrative construction is not. When news of the voice memo became public, Whitmore's political support eroded rapidly. Major donors withdrew contributions. Party leadership distanced themselves with carefully neutral language. Committee assignments were suspended pending trial. The optics he once curated now unraveled beyond his control. The preliminary hearings drew intense public interest. Veterans attended in quiet solidarity with Rivera. Journalists filled every available seat. Prosecutors methodically presented the metadata analysis, demonstrating that the complaint draft had been edited before the event concluded. They played the hallway footage and the parking garage memo in sequence, reinforcing the argument that the accusation had been strategic rather than reactive. Henley objected repeatedly, challenging context and inference. He argued that isolated phrases could be misleading without full conversational background. However, the judge allowed the evidence to stand for purposes of establishing probable cause. Whitmore was ordered to surrender his passport and remain within jurisdictional boundaries. A formal trial date was scheduled. Beyond the courtroom, investigative journalists began uncovering additional threads. Two individuals came forward privately, alleging similar confrontations followed by quiet reputational smears during prior election cycles. One claimed his business contracts evaporated after criticizing Whitmore publicly. Another disclosed signing a non-disclosure agreement tied to a defamation settlement. Meanwhile, financial investigators traced payments to Civic Shield Strategies with increasing clarity. The LLC, previously obscure, had received nearly $500,000 over several years in structured increments just below mandatory reporting thresholds. Corporate filings linked the entity to Whitmore's extended family network. When subpoenaed, the company dissolved within days. That abrupt dissolution did not erase digital records. As trial preparations intensified, prosecutors revealed another troubling discovery. Portions of the encrypted drive had been remotely accessed before the federal raid. The access originated from an IP address associated with a political consulting firm that held federal contracts unrelated to Whitmore's campaign. The implication was unsettling. If external actors had knowledge of the containment strategy, then Whitmore's operation might not have been isolated. It could have reflected a broader ecosystem of narrative management strategies deployed across campaigns. Evan Cole reported feeling unsafe. His attorney filed a complaint alleging potential witness intimidation. Although no direct link was immediately established, federal authorities expanded their inquiry. For Rivera, the unfolding revelations were sobering. What began as a personal defense against a false accusation now appeared to expose systemic vulnerabilities within political messaging machinery. He agreed to testify before a congressional ethics committee examining abuse of authority. As the trial date approached, one question loomed larger than the indictment itself: was Daniel Whitmore the architect of the template, or merely a beneficiary of a system that rewarded manufactured fear? If prosecutors could demonstrate that the containment framework extended beyond a single office, the case would transcend one man's career. It would challenge how power insulates itself from dissent. And somewhere within seized servers and decrypted backups, investigators continued searching for older archives, years predating 2016, years not yet scrutinized. Because if the template traveled, if the playbook had been shared, then the fall of one congressman would not close the story. It would open it.